The November rain fell in steady sheets across downtown Nashville, turning the sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon lights from the honky-tonk bars and music venues that lined Broadway. Marcus Thompson pulled his worn military jacket tighter around his shoulders, the fabric doing little to keep out the biting cold that seemed to seep through to his bones. At 52, he looked older than his years, his weathered face bearing the lines of countless nights spent under bridges and in doorways, his grey-streaked beard unkempt, and his brown eyes holding the distant look of someone who had seen too much. 3 years, 3 long years since he'd had a real roof over his head, since he'd slept in an actual bed, since he'd felt like he belonged anywhere. The transition from Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, decorated veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, to the homeless man people crossed the street to avoid, had been swift and brutal. The nightmares had started small, just fragments of memories that would wake him in cold sweats. Then came the drinking, the pills, the desperate attempts to quiet the voices in his head that replayed the sounds of explosions and the faces of friends who didn't make it home. His wife Sarah had tried to help. God knows she had tried. But when the bills started piling up and Marcus couldn't hold down a job for more than a few weeks, when the man she married seemed to disappear behind a wall of trauma and addiction, she had finally reached her breaking point. The divorce papers had been served on a Tuesday morning in March, along with an eviction notice that would leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a duffel bag containing his military medals and a few photographs of better times. Now, as he sat on a piece of cardboard behind a dumpster in an alley off Music Row, Marcus tried to remember what it felt like to have hope. The rain had soaked through his makeshift shelter and his stomach cramped with hunger. He'd managed to scrape together enough change earlier in the day to buy a cup of coffee and a stale sandwich from a convenience store, but that had been hours ago. The thought of approaching strangers for money made his chest tighten with shame, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Hey, you can't stay here," a voice called out from the mouth of the alley. Marcus looked up to see a security guard in a dark uniform, a flashlight beam cutting through the rain. "This is private property. You need to move along." Marcus slowly got to his feet, his joints protesting after hours of sitting on the cold concrete. "I'm not causing any trouble, sir. Just trying to stay dry." "I don't care what you're trying to do," the guard replied, his tone firm but not entirely unsympathetic. "Business owners are complaining. Find somewhere else." With practiced efficiency, Marcus gathered his few possessions, the cardboard, a thin blanket that smelled of mildew, and his duffel bag. He'd learned not to argue with security guards or police officers. It never ended well for people like him. "Yes, sir, I'm moving." The guard watched as Marcus made his way toward the street, then returned to his rounds. This was the 3rd time this week Marcus had been asked to move from somewhere he'd thought might offer temporary shelter. The churches were full, the shelters had waiting lists, and the warming centers only opened when temperatures dropped below freezing. Tonight, it was just cold and wet enough to be miserable, but not cold enough to qualify for emergency shelter. As he walked down 16th Avenue South, past the record labels and music publishing companies that had made Nashville famous, Marcus couldn't help but think about the irony of his situation. Here he was, invisible and forgotten, in a city that celebrated dreams and success. Every building around him represented someone's aspiration, someone's shot at making it big in the music industry. But for every success story, Marcus knew there were countless others who had fallen by the wayside, though probably not as far as he had. The rain began to let up as he reached the intersection with Division Street. The traffic was lighter now, most of the tourists and music industry workers having found their way home or to warm bars hours ago. Marcus paused under a streetlight, trying to decide which direction to go. East would take him toward the river, where there were more bridges and potentially drier spots to sleep, but also more competition from other homeless individuals and more police patrols. West would lead him into residential areas where he might find an unlocked shed or garage, but also where suspicious homeowners might call the authorities. As he stood there, weighing his options, Marcus heard the sound of squealing tires and shattering glass from somewhere up ahead. The unmistakable crunch of metal on metal echoed off the buildings, followed by the hiss of steam and the sharp smell of radiator fluid. Without thinking, he dropped his belongings and ran toward the sound, his military training overriding years of self-preservation instincts that told him to keep his head down and avoid getting involved. What he saw when he rounded the corner made his blood run cold. A black SUV had run a red light and T-boned a silver sedan, sending it spinning into a light pole. The SUV's driver was already climbing out, apparently uninjured but clearly intoxicated, stumbling and cursing as he tried to assess the damage to his vehicle. But it was the sedan that held Marcus's attention. The driver's side was crushed against the pole. Steam was rising from the engine, and he could see someone inside, a woman with red hair, slumped over the steering wheel. Other people were starting to gather, pulling out their phones to record the scene rather than help. Marcus heard someone call 911, but emergency services would take time to arrive. The woman in the car needed help now. As he got closer, he could see a thin line of smoke starting to rise from under the hood of the sedan. The acrid smell of burning oil, mixed with the metallic scent of blood, told him this situation was about to get much worse. "Someone help her!" Marcus shouted, but the small crowd of onlookers seemed frozen, more concerned with getting the perfect angle for their social media posts than actually intervening. The drunk driver from the SUV was now on his phone, probably calling his lawyer, completely ignoring the woman he had just nearly killed. Marcus didn't recognize her, couldn't see her face clearly through the spider-webbed windshield, but that didn't matter. She was a human being in desperate need of help, and he was the only one willing to provide it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a man whom society had written off as worthless, might be this woman's only chance at survival. The smoke from the engine was getting thicker now, and Marcus could hear the occasional pop and crackle that suggested the fire was spreading. He tried the driver's door, but it was jammed shut, the metal twisted from the impact. The passenger door was blocked by the light pole. That left only one option. He would have to break the window and pull her out through the opening. Looking around, Marcus spotted a loose brick from a nearby construction site. As he picked it up, he noticed his hands were shaking, but not from the cold this time. It had been 3 years since he'd been in a situation where someone else's life depended on his actions. 3 years since he'd felt the weight of responsibility that had once defined him as a soldier. For a moment, the old Marcus Thompson flickered to life beneath the layers of defeat and despair. "Stand back," he yelled to the crowd, most of whom were now filming him with their phones. "I'm going to break the window." With practiced precision, Marcus struck the passenger side window at its corner, where the glass would be weakest. It took 3 hits before the safety glass shattered into 1,000 small pieces, allowing him to brush them aside and reach into the car. The woman was unconscious. A small cut on her forehead, bleeding freely, but she was breathing. As Marcus worked to unbuckle her seatbelt, he got his first clear look at her face. Even unconscious and injured, there was something familiar about her features. The high cheekbones, the distinctive jawline, the carefully maintained red hair that was now disheveled from the accident. It took him a moment to place her, but when recognition dawned, it hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just any woman he was rescuing. This was Reba McEntire, the queen of country music, a living legend whose songs had been the soundtrack to countless American lives, including his own. Marcus had grown up listening to Reba's music in his family's small farmhouse in rural Kentucky. His mother had been a huge fan, playing albums like Whoever's in New England and The Last One to Know on repeat while she cleaned house and cooked dinner. Even during his darkest days in Afghanistan, when the mortar rounds were falling and his unit was pinned down in hostile territory, Marcus had sometimes hummed Fancy or The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia to keep his spirits up and his mind focused on home. But there was no time for star-struck reverence now. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could see actual flames starting to lick up from the engine compartment. Marcus managed to get Reba's seatbelt undone and carefully worked his arms around her torso, trying to support her head and neck as he pulled her toward the passenger window. She was heavier than she looked, and the awkward angle made the extraction difficult, but Marcus's military training kicked in. He had carried wounded soldiers out of worse situations than this. "Come on, Mom," he whispered as he maneuvered her through the window opening, careful not to let her body catch on any remaining glass. "Let's get you out of here." Just as he managed to pull Reba free from the vehicle, the engine compartment erupted in flames. The crowd gasped and stepped back instinctively, but Marcus was already carrying her away from the burning car, looking for a safe place to lay her down. He found a patch of grass near the sidewalk and gently placed her there, checking her pulse and breathing. Both seemed steady, which was encouraging, but the cut on her head was still bleeding, and she remained unconscious. Marcus knelt beside her, using his jacket to apply pressure to the wound on her forehead. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he said softly. "You've been in an accident, but you're safe now. Help is on the way." It was then that he became aware of the phones still recording him, of the voices in the crowd, discussing what they had just witnessed. Someone was narrating the scene like a sports announcer. "Oh my God, that homeless guy just pulled Reba McEntire out of a burning car. This is incredible. This is going straight to YouTube." Another voice chimed in. "Wait, that's really Reba McEntire? Holy shit, she could have died. That guy saved her life." Marcus tried to ignore the commentary and focus on his patient. Reba's eyelids were starting to flutter, which was a good sign. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, try not to move too much. You might have a concussion." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, but gradually sharpening as they settled on Marcus's face. For a moment, she looked confused, trying to process what had happened. Then her gaze moved to the burning car behind him, and understanding dawned. "You," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You pulled me out." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, maintaining the pressure on her head wound. "Just lie still. The paramedics should be here soon." Reba studied his face, taking in the weathered features, the kind eyes, the gentle way he was tending to her injury. "What's your name?" "Marcus Thompson, ma'am." "Thank you, Marcus Thompson," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I think you just saved my life." Before Marcus could respond, the wail of sirens filled the air as fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars converged on the scene. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as paramedics took over Reba's care. Firefighters worked to extinguish the burning car, and police officers began interviewing witnesses and taking statements from everyone involved. Marcus tried to fade into the background as the professionals did their work. He had done what needed to be done, and now he wanted to disappear before someone started asking uncomfortable questions about his living situation or demanding identification he no longer had. But as he tried to slip away, a firm hand landed on his shoulder. "Sir, I need to get a statement from you," said Officer Janet Rodriguez, a veteran Nashville police officer who had seen her share of accident scenes. "The witnesses say you're the one who pulled the victim from the burning vehicle." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus replied, uncomfortable with the attention. "Actually, sir, most people would have stood there with their phones out just like they did," Officer Rodriguez observed, nodding toward the crowd that was still lingering despite the late hour. "What you did took real courage. We're going to need some information from you for our report." As Marcus reluctantly provided his basic information to the officer, he was unaware that several of the bystander videos were already being uploaded to social media platforms. The dramatic rescue, complete with the burning car and the revelation that the victim was country music royalty, was exactly the kind of content that social media algorithms love to promote. Within hours, the footage would be viewed by thousands of people, and by morning it would be seen by millions. The paramedics were loading Reba into the ambulance when she called out to Marcus. "Wait," she said, causing the EMTs to pause. "Marcus, I want you to know that what you did tonight, it matters. It matters more than you probably realize." Marcus nodded awkwardly, still not entirely comfortable with being the center of attention. "I hope you're going to be okay, ma'am." "I will be, thanks to you," Reba replied, as the paramedics closed the ambulance doors. As the emergency vehicles pulled away and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing alone on the sidewalk, the reality of what had just happened starting to sink in. He had saved someone's life tonight, someone famous and important. But more than that, he had remembered what it felt like to be useful again, to matter in some small way. For the first time in 3 years, he had been the solution to a problem, rather than the problem itself. Officer Rodriguez finished her paperwork and approached him one final time. "Mr. Thompson, is there somewhere we can reach you if we need any follow-up information?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, reminding him of his reality. "I don't have a permanent address," he admitted quietly. "I'm between situations right now." Officer Rodriguez's expression softened with understanding. She had been a cop in Nashville long enough to recognize the euphemisms homeless people used to maintain their dignity. "I see. Well, if anything changes, you can always contact us through the main number." As the officer walked away, Marcus retrieved his belongings from where he had dropped them earlier. The cardboard was soggy from the rain, his blanket was soaked, and his duffel bag had absorbed water through a small tear in the fabric. But somehow, those inconveniences seemed less important now. He had been reminded tonight that he was still capable of doing something meaningful, still capable of making a difference in someone's life. He began walking east toward the river, looking for a dry place to spend what remained of the night. The rain had stopped completely now, and the clouds were starting to break apart, revealing patches of stars between them. As he walked, Marcus found himself humming one of Reba's songs, "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," a ballad about regret and missed opportunities that had always resonated with him. Tonight, for the first time in years, Marcus Thompson didn't feel like a failure. He didn't know it yet, but his act of courage had been witnessed by more people than just the small crowd on Division Street. The videos were spreading across the internet with unprecedented speed, and by morning his story would be known to millions of people around the world. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine, but for now, he was content to walk through the quiet streets of Nashville, carrying with him the memory of being a hero once again. As he found a relatively dry spot under a bridge and settled in for the night, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles to find food and shelter and dignity in a world that had seemingly forgotten he existed. But tonight, he had saved a life. Tonight, he had mattered. And for a man who had spent 3 years believing he was worthless, that was everything. The persistent buzzing of Marcus's ancient flip phone jolted him awake at 6:30 a.m. The device, a relic from better times that he kept charged at public libraries and fast food restaurants, rarely rang anymore. Most of the contacts in its memory belonged to a life he no longer lived. His ex-wife, former co-workers, drinking buddies who had long since stopped trying to maintain friendships with someone who had fallen so far from grace. Marcus fumbled for the phone in the early morning darkness under the Cumberland River Bridge, where he had finally found shelter around 3 a.m. His body ached from sleeping on concrete, and his clothes were still damp from the previous night's rain. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, which usually meant a wrong number or a debt collector who had somehow tracked down his long disconnected line. "Hello?" His voice was hoarse from sleep and the cold. "Is this Marcus Thompson?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with the rapid-fire cadence of someone who made a living talking fast. "The Marcus Thompson who rescued Reba McEntire last night." Marcus sat up quickly, immediately regretting the sudden movement as his stiff muscles protested. "Who is this?" "This is Jennifer Walsh from Good Morning Nashville. I'm a producer for the show, and we'd love to have you on this morning to talk about what happened. The video of your rescue has gone completely viral overnight. We're talking millions of views across all platforms." "I'm sorry, what video?" Marcus asked, though even as he spoke, a sinking feeling began to form in his stomach. He remembered the phones, the people recording everything, but he had assumed those videos would remain on someone's personal device or maybe get shared with a few friends. "Sir, you haven't seen it. The footage of you pulling Ms. McEntire from that burning car is everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, it's the biggest story in Nashville right now, and it's spreading nationally. CNN picked it up an hour ago, and we're getting calls from networks all over the country." Marcus climbed to his feet and walked to the edge of the bridge, where he could get better cell reception. The Tennessee sunrise was painting the river in shades of gold and pink, and early morning joggers were already making their way along the riverside paths. None of them paid any attention to the homeless man standing above them, unaware that he was suddenly the most famous person in Nashville. "I don't understand," Marcus said, though part of him was beginning to. He had lived through the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, had seen how quickly stories could spread in the age of social media, but he had never imagined being at the center of one himself. "What exactly are people saying?" "They're calling you a hero," Jennifer Walsh continued, her excitement barely contained. "The story has everything people love: a dramatic rescue, a beloved celebrity, and an unlikely hero. The comments are incredible. People are asking who you are, where you came from, how they can help you. This is exactly the kind of feel-good story that America needs right now." The irony of being called an unlikely hero wasn't lost on Marcus. He had been a professional soldier, trained specifically to put his life on the line for others. The only thing unlikely about last night's rescue was that someone like him had been in the right place at the right time. But he understood what the producer meant. In the eyes of the public, homeless people were invisible at best, problems to be solved at worst. The idea that one of them could be a hero didn't fit the comfortable narrative that allowed society to ignore their existence. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm not really the kind of person who goes on television shows. Mr. Thompson, with respect, I don't think you understand what's happening here. This story is going to be told with or without your participation. We've already confirmed that you're a military veteran, that you've been living on the streets for several years. The human interest angle is incredible, but we'd much rather tell your story with your help than without it." The mention of his military service caught Marcus off guard. "How did you find that out?" "We have researchers who are very good at what they do. Public records, social media posts from before you became homeless, interviews with people who knew you. It's all standard practice for a story this big. Look, I know this must be overwhelming, but this could be a real opportunity for you. People are responding to this story in a huge way, and that kind of attention could change your life." Marcus ended the call without another word and immediately turned off his phone. He needed time to think, to process what he was hearing. He gathered his few belongings and began walking toward downtown Nashville, his mind racing. The idea that millions of people had watched video of him rescuing Reba McEntire was surreal enough, But the suggestion that media outlets were already investigating his background was deeply unsettling. As he walked along Broadway, Nashville's famous strip of honky-tonk bars and tourist attractions, Marcus began to notice things that seemed different from other mornings. People were looking at him, some openly staring, others sneaking glances when they thought he wasn't watching. A few were holding up their phones, apparently taking pictures or videos. The attention made his skin crawl. Marcus ducked into a McDonald's where he sometimes used the restroom and tried to blend in among the early morning customers. At a corner table, a group of construction workers were huddled around a smartphone, watching something intently. As he passed by on his way to the restroom, he heard a familiar voice coming from the device's speaker. "Mom, can you hear me? You've been in an accident, but you're safe now. Help is on the way." It was his own voice, captured by one of the bystanders last night. Marcus froze, listening to himself on the recording, watching the workers' faces as they observed his rescue of Reba McEntire. Their expressions were a mixture of amazement and respect, emotions that Marcus hadn't seen directed toward him in years. "Damn," one of the workers said. "That took some real balls. Most people would have just stood there filming." "That guy's a veteran too," another added, apparently reading comments on the video. "Been homeless for a few years. Makes it even more impressive, you know? Guy's got nothing, but he still risks his life for someone else." Marcus hurried to the restroom before they could notice him standing there. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror, trying to reconcile the person staring back at him with the hero everyone seemed to think he had become. He saw a man who hadn't shaved in a week, whose clothes smelled of rain and concrete, whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who had given up on most of life's possibilities. But apparently, millions of people saw something different. When he emerged from the restroom, Marcus noticed that one of the construction workers was looking directly at him with a strange expression. Recognition was dawning on the man's face, and Marcus realized he needed to get out of there before the situation became even more complicated. "Excuse me," the worker called out as Marcus headed for the door. "Aren't you the guy who—" Marcus didn't wait to hear the rest of the question. He pushed through the door and back onto the sidewalk, where the morning foot traffic was picking up as Nashville began its daily routine. But even out on the street, he couldn't escape the attention. More people were recognizing him, some approaching directly, while others simply pulled out their phones to document their encounter with the homeless hero, as he was apparently being called online. A young woman with bright purple hair and multiple piercings stepped into his path, her phone held up to record their interaction. "Oh my God, you're Marcus Thompson, you're famous. Can I get a selfie with you?" "I'd rather you didn't," Marcus replied, trying to step around her. "Come on, just one picture. My followers are going to freak out. What you did last night was so amazing. You're like a real-life superhero." More people were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion and the possibility of witnessing something social media worthy. Marcus felt his breathing becoming shallow and rapid, the familiar signs of a panic attack beginning to manifest. The crowd, the phones, the attention. It was too much, too fast. He needed to get somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think. "Please," he said to the purple-haired woman, "I just want to be left alone." But his plea only seemed to attract more attention. Someone in the growing crowd shouted, "It's him! It's the guy who saved Reba!" And suddenly Marcus found himself surrounded by a dozen people, all trying to get pictures or videos, all asking questions he wasn't prepared to answer. "How does it feel to be a hero? Are you really homeless? Has Reba McEntire contacted you? What are you going to do with all the money people are trying to give you?" The last question stopped Marcus cold. "What money?" A teenager with the expensive-looking camera said, "Dude, people have started like 5 different GoFundMe campaigns for you. Last I checked, they had raised over $50,000. It's probably way more by now." Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. GoFundMe campaigns, $50,000. This was spinning completely out of control. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring their protests, and continued recording, and began walking quickly toward the river, hoping to find some peace in the less touristy areas of the city. But escape proved impossible. Even in the quieter neighborhoods, people recognized him from the viral videos. Some were kind and respectful, offering food or money, or simply thanking him for his heroism. Others treated him like a curiosity, a living meme to be documented and shared. A few seemed skeptical, questioning whether the rescue had been genuine or staged for internet fame. By midday, Marcus's phone was buzzing constantly, despite being turned off and on again. Somehow, media outlets had gotten hold of his number, and the interview requests were pouring in. Good Morning America, The Today Show, CNN, Fox News, local stations from around the country. Everyone wanted to talk to the homeless veteran who had saved country music's biggest star. Marcus found himself sitting on a bench in Centennial Park, staring at his phone as it buzzed with yet another incoming call. The caller ID showed a Nashville number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice on the other end made his heart skip a beat. "Marcus, this is Reba McEntire." For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. The woman whose life he had saved, whose music had been the soundtrack to some of his happiest memories, was calling him personally. "Ms. McEntire," he finally managed, "how are you feeling? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, thanks to you," Reba replied, her voice warm and genuine. "I've got a few stitches and a mild concussion, but the doctors say I'm going to be perfectly fine. I wanted to call and thank you personally before this whole media circus gets any more out of hand." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No, Marcus, that's where you're wrong. I've seen the videos, and there were plenty of other people standing around with their phones out. You were the only one who stepped up. You were the only one who cared enough to act." There was a pause, and Marcus could hear voices in the background, probably doctors or family members checking on her condition. "Marcus, I know this attention must be overwhelming for you. I've been famous for a long time, and I know how crazy it can get when the media gets hold of a story like this. But I want you to know that if you need anything at all, you just have to ask. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm not looking for any handouts." "This isn't about handouts," Reba said firmly. "This is about recognizing that you saved my life, and that matters to me more than you can possibly know. I've been blessed with success and resources, and I believe in using those blessings to help people who deserve it. You deserve it, Marcus." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the park for a long time, watching families play with their children and couples walk hand in hand along the paths. The normalcy of it all seemed surreal, given what his life had become in the span of less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he had been invisible, just another homeless person that society preferred to ignore. Today, he was famous, a viral sensation whose story was being told and retold across every media platform imaginable. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus realized that there was no going back to his old life of anonymity. The videos were out there forever, his face was recognizable to millions of people, and the media attention showed no signs of dying down. His phone continued to buzz with interview requests, and he noticed news vans beginning to patrol the areas where homeless people typically congregated, reporters hoping to get additional background on the story. The attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it had apparently motivated strangers to donate thousands of dollars to help him get back on his feet. On the other hand, it had stripped away his privacy and forced him into a spotlight he had never sought. For someone who had spent 3 years trying to disappear, being the center of national attention felt like a special kind of torture. As evening approached and Marcus prepared to find somewhere to sleep for another night, he realized that tomorrow would bring even more challenges. The morning shows would be broadcasting their segments about his rescue. The story would spread to even larger audiences, and the pressure to participate in interviews and public appearances would only intensify. But perhaps most challenging of all was the way people were looking at him now. Where once they had seen a problem to be avoided, they now saw a hero to be celebrated. The shift was disorienting, and Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to live up to the expectations that came with his newfound fame. As he settled in under a different bridge for the night, the old one had been discovered by a news crew. Marcus reflected on Reba McEntire's words. She had said he deserved help, deserved recognition for his actions. After 3 years of feeling worthless, of believing that his best days were behind him, that was a difficult concept to accept. But maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe this viral moment could become something more than just internet fame. Maybe it could be the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where Marcus Thompson mattered again, where his actions had meaning and consequences that extended beyond mere survival. The videos had made him famous overnight, but what he did with that fame was still up to him. As he closed his eyes and tried to sleep despite the continued buzzing of his phone, Marcus began to consider the possibility that his life might actually be about to change for the better. The insistent knocking on the bridge supports above Marcus's makeshift shelter woke him before dawn. He had learned to be a light sleeper during his years on the streets. Deep sleep was a luxury that could get you robbed, arrested, or worse. But this wasn't the usual sounds of police flashlights or other homeless individuals looking for a place to rest. This was deliberate, purposeful knocking, accompanied by a voice calling his name. "Marcus Thompson! Mr. Thompson, are you down there?" Marcus peered out from under his tarp to see a well-dressed woman in her 40s standing at the edge of the riverbank. Her expensive heels clearly not designed for navigating the rocky terrain that led down to his sleeping spot. Behind her, a black SUV idled at the roadside, its hazard lights flashing in the pre-dawn darkness. "I'm Beverly Patterson," the woman called out, carefully making her way down the embankment. "I work for Reba McEntire's management company. She sent me to find you." Marcus emerged fully from his shelter, immediately self-conscious about his appearance. He hadn't had a proper shower in weeks, and sleeping rough had done nothing to improve his presentation. "Ma'am, it's pretty early. Is everything all right?" Beverly Patterson reached the bottom of the embankment and extended her hand in greeting, seemingly unfazed by Marcus's condition or surroundings. "Everything's fine, Mr. Thompson. Better than fine, actually. Reba would like to meet with you this morning if you're willing. She has a proposition that I think you'll want to hear." "I don't understand." "We talked on the phone yesterday. She said she was grateful, and I told her that was enough." Beverly smiled, and Marcus could see why Reba would hire someone with such a warm, genuine demeanor to handle sensitive situations. "Mr. Thompson, I've worked with Reba for over 15 years, and I've never seen her more determined to help someone. What you did 2 nights ago, pulling her from that burning car, it affected her deeply. She's not the kind of person who just says thank you and moves on." Marcus began gathering his belongings, partly out of habit and partly because he sensed this conversation was leading somewhere that would require him to be mobile. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that's better discussed over breakfast and coffee," Beverly replied. "There's a diner about 10 minutes from here that opens at 5 a.m. Reba is waiting for us there." Marcus hesitated. The idea of sitting down to breakfast with one of country music's biggest stars seemed surreal, like something that would happen to someone else, someone whose life hadn't fallen apart so spectacularly. "Ms. Patterson, I appreciate Ms. McEntire's gratitude, but I'm not really the kind of person who deserves a second chance," Beverly interrupted gently, "because that's exactly the kind of person you are, Mr. Thompson, and that's exactly what Reba wants to offer you." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself sitting in a booth at Hermitage Cafe, a 24-hour diner that had been serving Nashville's late-night crowd and early morning workers for decades. The place was nearly empty at this hour, just a few truck drivers and hospital workers grabbing coffee before their shifts. Reba McEntire sat across from him, looking remarkably composed for someone who had been in a serious car accident less than 48 hours earlier. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her famous red hair pulled back in a ponytail, and if not for the small bandage on her forehead and the slight bruising around her left eye, she might have been any other customer grabbing an early breakfast. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," Reba said as the waitress poured coffee into their cups. "I know this must feel strange." "That's one way to put it," Marcus replied, still trying to process the surreal nature of the situation. "Ma'am, I have to ask, how did you find me? I've been careful not to stay in the same place 2 nights in a row." Reba exchanged a glance with Beverly before answering. "We hired a private investigator, not to spy on you or invade your privacy, but because we wanted to help you and we needed to understand your situation better. What we learned about you, Marcus, made me even more determined to do something meaningful for you." The waitress approached to take their order, and Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he had sat in a restaurant and ordered from a menu rather than counting change to see if he could afford a cup of coffee. Reba ordered pancakes and bacon, while Beverly asked for an egg white omelette. Marcus, overwhelmed by the choices and acutely aware of his financial situation, mumbled something about just coffee being fine. "Nonsense," Reba said firmly. "Order whatever you want. This is my treat, and I insist you eat something substantial." Eventually, Marcus settled on scrambled eggs, hash browns, and toast, comfort food that reminded him of Sunday mornings with his ex-wife in their kitchen, back when his biggest worry was whether his unit would be deployed again. As they waited for their food, Reba leaned forward across the table, her expression serious. "Marcus, the investigator told us about your military service. 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated for valor, Bronze Star recipient. He also told us about what happened when you came home, the PTSD, the struggles with alcohol and prescription drugs, the divorce, losing your job and your house. I want you to know that none of that changes what you did for me the other night. If anything, it makes it more remarkable." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had spent 3 years trying to forget about his military service, about the person he used to be, before the war broke something fundamental inside him. "Ms. McEntire, with respect, my past doesn't matter. What happened to me overseas, what I've done since I got back, none of that changes the fact that I'm a homeless man with addiction problems who hasn't been able to get his life together." "That's where you're wrong," Reba replied. "Your past matters because it shows who you really are. You're a man who served his country with distinction, who put your life on the line for your fellow soldiers, and who, even after losing everything, still had the courage and compassion to risk your safety for a complete stranger. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." The food arrived, and Marcus found himself eating slowly, savoring flavors and textures he had almost forgotten. Real eggs cooked to order, hash browns crispy on the outside and fluffy inside, buttered toast that was actually warm. Simple pleasures that he had once taken for granted but now seemed almost luxurious. "The videos of your rescue have been viewed over 20 million times, Beverly said, consulting her phone. "The GoFundMe campaigns that people started for you have raised almost $200,000. Good Morning America, The Today Show, 60 Minutes, they all want to interview you. You've become a symbol of hope for a lot of people, Marcus." "I never asked to be a symbol of anything," Marcus replied. "I just saw someone who needed help." "That's exactly why you're the right person for what we want to propose," Reba said. "Marcus, I've been thinking about this since I woke up in the hospital. You saved my life, and now I want to help save yours. But more than that, I want us to work together to help other people who are in situations like yours." Reba reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, which she placed on the table between them. "I want to start a foundation, Marcus. A non-profit organization dedicated to helping homeless veterans get back on their feet. Not just with temporary housing or meals, but with comprehensive support, mental health services, job training, addiction treatment, permanent housing assistance. The whole package." Marcus opened the folder and found preliminary documents outlining the proposed foundation, budget projections, and organizational charts. The numbers were staggering. Reba was talking about committing millions of dollars to this effort. "Ms. McEntire, this is incredibly generous, but I don't understand what it has to do with me." "I want you to run it," Reba said simply. "I want you to be the face of this foundation, the person who represents what's possible when we refuse to give up on people. You understand the problems these veterans face because you've lived them. You know what kind of help actually works because you know what it feels like to need it." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not qualified to run a foundation. I don't have a college degree, I haven't held a steady job in 3 years, and I'm still fighting my own demons. I'm not the success story you need me to be." "You're exactly the story we need," Beverly interjected. "People don't connect with perfect success stories, Marcus. They connect with real people who have faced real struggles and found ways to overcome them. Your journey back from homelessness and addiction, that's what will inspire other veterans to believe that recovery is possible." Reba nodded in agreement. "This foundation isn't about pretending that everything is easy or that there's a simple solution to complex problems. It's about showing that with the right support, with people who believe in you and refuse to give up on you, anyone can rebuild their life. You're living proof of that possibility." "But I haven't rebuilt my life," Marcus protested. "I'm still homeless. I'm still struggling every day just to survive." "Not anymore," Reba said with a smile. "That's going to change, starting today. The foundation will provide you with housing, a salary, health insurance, and access to whatever treatment and support services you need. But more importantly, it will give you a purpose, a way to use your experiences to help other people." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Reba was proposing. It was everything he had lost and more. Not just a job and a place to live, but a chance to matter again, to use his skills and experiences in service of something larger than himself. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "You could hire someone with experience running non-profits, someone with credentials and connections." "Because credentials and connections don't save people from burning cars," Reba replied. "Courage does, compassion does, and you've shown me that you have both of those things in abundance." The three of them spent the next 2 hours discussing the details of the foundation. Reba had clearly been thinking about this for much longer than the 2 days since her accident. She had consulted with lawyers, accountants, and non-profit management experts to develop a comprehensive plan for launching and operating the organization. The foundation would start with a focus on Nashville and Middle Tennessee, but with the goal of expanding to other cities with large veteran populations. Marcus would start as the Director of Veteran Services, working directly with homeless veterans to assess their needs and connect them with appropriate resources. As the foundation grew and he gained experience, he could take on additional responsibilities. The salary they were offering was more than he had made even in his best years before the war, and the benefits package included not just health insurance, but also mental health coverage specifically designed for veterans dealing with PTSD and addiction. "There's one condition," Reba said as they prepared to leave the diner. "You have to get clean and stay clean. The foundation will pay for whatever treatment you need, inpatient rehab, outpatient counseling, medication-assisted treatment, whatever works for you." But this job requires sobriety, and maintaining that sobriety has to be your top priority. Marcus nodded, understanding the non-negotiable nature of the requirement. I've been trying to get clean on my own for 3 years. It hasn't worked. That's because you've been trying to do it alone, Beverly said. This time, you'll have support, professional support, personal support, and a reason to stay sober that goes beyond just surviving another day. As they walked toward Beverly's SUV, Marcus caught his reflection in the diner's window. He looked like exactly what he was, a homeless man who hadn't had a proper shower or shave in weeks, whose clothes had been worn for days and slept in for nights. But Reba and Beverly had seen past that exterior to something else, something he had almost forgotten existed within himself. "When do we start?" Marcus asked. "Today," Reba replied. "Beverly is going to take you to get some new clothes and help you find temporary housing while we finalize the foundation paperwork. Next week, you'll start working with our lawyers and consultants to develop the program structure." "And, Marcus?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Stop calling me ma'am. My friends call me Reba, and I have a feeling we're going to be working together for a long time." As they drove through Nashville toward a men's clothing store that Beverly had already called to ensure they would be open early, Marcus watched the city wake up around him. Construction workers heading to job sites, office workers stopping for coffee, families getting children ready for school, all the normal activities of people with normal lives, lives that suddenly seemed possible for him again. The viral video that had made him famous had been viewed by millions of people, but Marcus was beginning to understand that its real impact wasn't the fame or the attention. It was this moment, sitting in an SUV with 2 women who had looked at his worst circumstances and seen his best possibilities. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Thompson had hoped that his future could be different from his recent past. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Getting sober never was, and learning to run a non-profit organization would require skills he wasn't sure he possessed. But as Nashville's skyline came into view and Reba began describing her vision for how their foundation could help thousands of veterans across the country, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before his first deployment: excitement about what tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his new apartment, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn since his last job interview 4 years earlier. The reflection staring back at him was almost unrecognizable from the man who had been sleeping under bridges just a month ago. His hair was neatly trimmed, his beard professionally shaped, and the new suit that Beverly had helped him select fit perfectly. But the most significant change wasn't visible. For the first time in years, his eyes held hope instead of resignation. The apartment was modest by most standards, a 1-bedroom unit in a renovated building near downtown Nashville, but to Marcus it felt like a palace. A real bed with clean sheets, a kitchen with a refrigerator full of food, a shower with unlimited hot water, luxuries he had dreamed about during countless cold nights on the streets. The foundation had covered the security deposit and first 3 months' rent, giving him time to establish his sobriety and begin his new job before taking on the responsibility of regular housing payments. Today marked the official launch of the McEntire Thompson Foundation for Homeless Veterans, a name that still made Marcus uncomfortable despite Reba's insistence that his contribution deserved recognition. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Foundation's new headquarters, a renovated warehouse in East Nashville that would house administrative offices, counseling services, job training programs, and temporary housing for veterans in crisis. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sarah Coleman, the addiction counselor he had been seeing 3 times a week since starting his recovery program. "Remember what we practiced. Deep breaths, focus on your purpose, and don't let the cameras intimidate you. You've got this." The past 3 weeks had been the most challenging and rewarding of Marcus's life. Getting clean had been harder than he remembered from his previous attempts, complicated by the stress of his newfound fame and the pressure of starting a new job. The foundation had arranged for him to spend 10 days in an intensive outpatient program, followed by ongoing counseling and participation in a support group specifically designed for veterans dealing with addiction and PTSD. Dr. Coleman had helped him understand that his substance abuse wasn't a moral failing, but a misguided attempt to treat untreated trauma. For the first time, Marcus had access to medications that could help manage his PTSD symptoms without the devastating side effects of alcohol and unprescribed drugs. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were less frequent and less intense than they had been in years. Equally important was the sense of purpose that came with his new role at the foundation. Marcus had spent the past 2 weeks visiting homeless encampments around Nashville, talking with veterans about their experiences and needs. The conversations were often heartbreaking, stories of men and women who had served their country with honor only to find themselves abandoned by the systems that were supposed to support them when they returned home. But those conversations had also been illuminating. Marcus discovered that his own experiences, as painful as they had been, gave him credibility with people who had learned to distrust social workers, case managers, and other well-meaning professionals who had never lived on the streets. When Marcus talked about the shame of addiction, the despair of homelessness, and the difficulty of asking for help, other veterans listened because they knew he understood their struggles from personal experience. A knock at his apartment door interrupted his preparations. Marcus opened it to find James Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran who had been homeless for 5 years before the foundation's preliminary programs had helped him find permanent housing and a part-time job at a local hardware store. James was wearing his own new suit, purchased with money from his first steady paycheck in half a decade. "Ready for the big day?" James asked, straightening Marcus's tie with the precision of someone who had worn military uniforms for most of his adult life. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied. "I still can't believe this is actually happening." James smiled, and Marcus could see the transformation that had taken place in the older veteran over the past few weeks. When they first met, James had been suspicious and withdrawn, convinced that the foundation was just another government program that would promise help and deliver bureaucracy. But as he had worked with Marcus to develop the foundation's peer support programs, James had gradually opened up, revealing the sharp intelligence and natural leadership skills that had made him an effective squad leader in Vietnam. "You know what the difference is between this foundation and all the other programs that have tried to help us?" James asked as they walked toward the elevator. "What's that?" "This one was started by people who actually give a damn, and it's being run by someone who knows what it's like to sleep in his car and wonder where his next meal is coming from. That matters, Marcus. That matters more than you realize." The ride to the foundation headquarters was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts about how dramatically their lives had changed. Marcus thought about his ex-wife, Sarah, who had called him the previous week after seeing news coverage about the foundation. The conversation had been awkward but cordial, and while she had made it clear that too much damage had been done for them to reconcile romantically, she had expressed genuine happiness about his recovery and his new opportunity. "I always knew you were a good man, Marcus," she had said. "I just wish you had been able to see it in yourself before things got so bad between us." The foundation headquarters was bustling with activity when Marcus and James arrived. Volunteers were setting up chairs for the press conference, while staff members from various Nashville media outlets tested cameras and microphones. Marcus recognized several faces from the local news programs he had watched in hospital waiting rooms and shelter common areas during his homeless years, never imagining that someday they would be there to cover his story. Reba was already there, dressed in a sharp business suit and conferring with Beverly and the Foundation's legal team about last-minute details. Despite her busy schedule and the demands of her recording career, she had been intimately involved in every aspect of the Foundation's development, insisting on approving everything from the mission statement to the color scheme of the office decorations. "Marcus," Reba called out when she spotted him, "perfect timing. I want you to meet some people." She led him over to a group of individuals he didn't recognize, a mix of older veterans, middle-aged professionals, and younger people who looked like they might be journalists or activists. As Reba made introductions, Marcus realized he was meeting the Foundation's board of directors, a carefully selected group that included veterans, mental health professionals, addiction counselors, non-profit management experts, and community leaders. "Dr. Elizabeth Martinez is our board chair," Reba explained, indicating a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "She's the former director of the VA Medical Center and has 40 years of experience in veteran services." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "Marcus, I've been following your story since the night of the accident. What you've accomplished in just 3 weeks is remarkable, but what impresses me most is your commitment to using your experiences to help other people. That's the mark of a true leader." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, briefings, and last-minute preparations. Marcus met the Foundation's clinical director, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD and substance abuse disorders. He spoke with the job training coordinator, a former Army sergeant who had developed successful employment programs for homeless veterans in 3 other cities. He was introduced to the housing specialist, a social worker who had spent her career helping people transition from the streets to permanent housing. As the press conference time approached, Marcus felt his anxiety building. Dr. Coleman had warned him that this would be the most challenging part of his recovery so far, standing in front of cameras and reporters, telling his story to a national audience, and accepting the responsibility that came with being the public face of the Foundation. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could get everyone seated, we're ready to begin," Beverly announced to the assembled crowd. Marcus took his place at the podium next to Reba, looking out at an audience that included not just media representatives, but also local government officials, representatives from other non-profit organizations, and a substantial number of homeless veterans who had heard about the Foundation through word of mouth and social services networks. Reba spoke first, explaining her motivation for starting the Foundation and her belief that society had a moral obligation to care for the men and women who had served in the military. She talked about the night of her accident, about waking up to find Marcus pulling her from the burning car, and about her immediate recognition that she had been saved by someone whom society had failed. The McEntire Thompson Foundation isn't just about providing housing or meals or job training, Reba said, her voice carrying the same emotional power that had made her a country music legend. It's about recognizing the dignity and worth of every person, especially those who have served our country and found themselves in circumstances that no veteran should ever have to face. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he approached the microphone with the same mixture of nervousness and determination he had felt before his first combat mission in Afghanistan. The room fell silent as he looked out at the faces staring back at him, some curious, some skeptical, some hopeful. 3 weeks ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, Marcus began, his voice stronger than he had expected. I had been homeless for 3 years, struggling with addiction and PTSD, convinced that my best days were behind me and that I had nothing left to contribute to the world. He paused, making eye contact with several of the homeless veterans in the audience, men and women whose faces reflected his own struggles and pain. I want every veteran in this room, every veteran watching this on television, to understand something important. Your service matters, your life has value, and it's never too late for things to get better. The foundation that we're launching today isn't just about providing services, it's about providing hope. Marcus went on to describe the Foundation's programs in detail, explaining how they would differ from existing services by taking a comprehensive, individualized approach to each veteran's needs. Instead of simply offering temporary shelter or meals, the Foundation would provide long-term support designed to address the root causes of homelessness and help veterans rebuild their lives permanently. "We're not going to give up on you," Marcus said, addressing the homeless veterans directly. "We're not going to treat you like statistics or problems to be managed. We're going to treat you like the heroes you are, like the valuable members of our community that you've always been, even when the world seemed to forget." The questions from reporters were challenging but respectful. They asked about funding, about measurable outcomes, about how the Foundation would avoid the bureaucratic problems that plagued many other veteran services organizations. Marcus and Reba answered them as a team, demonstrating the partnership that would define the Foundation's leadership structure. One reporter asked Marcus about his own recovery process and whether he was concerned about the pressure of being a public figure while still in early sobriety. It was a fair question, one that Dr. Coleman had prepared him for. "Recovery is a daily process," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm not cured of PTSD or addiction, and I probably never will be. But I've learned that having a purpose bigger than yourself, having people who believe in you and hold you accountable, and having access to professional help when you need it, those things make recovery possible. This Foundation gives me all of those things, and we want to provide them for other veterans too." After the press conference, Marcus spent another hour talking individually with reporters and meeting with the homeless veterans who had attended. Many of them were skeptical about yet another program promising to help them, but Marcus could see that his personal story was having an impact. They recognized something authentic in his presentation, something that distinguished him from the social workers and bureaucrats they had encountered before. One woman, a Marine veteran named Patricia Williams, who had been living in her car for 8 months, pulled Marcus aside as the crowd was dispersing. "Is this for real?" she asked bluntly. "Or is this just another photo opportunity that's going to disappear once the cameras leave?" Marcus looked into her eyes and saw his own doubts and fears reflected back at him. "Patricia, I can't promise that this Foundation is going to solve all your problems. What I can promise is that we're going to be here tomorrow and next week and next month. We're going to keep showing up until we figure out how to help you get back on your feet. And what if I fail? What if I can't stay clean, or I can't handle a job, or I mess up like I've messed up everything else? Then we'll help you try again," Marcus replied. "That's what second chances are for." As the last of the attendees left the Foundation headquarters, Marcus stood alone in the main room, looking around at the space that would become his second home. The walls were lined with information about veteran services, job training programs, and addiction recovery resources. Comfortable chairs were arranged in circles for group counseling sessions. A small kitchen would provide meals for veterans who needed them, and a computer lab would help people with job searches and benefit applications. It was everything Marcus had wished for during his own darkest days on the streets. A place where homeless veterans could find not just immediate help, but genuine hope for the future. The fact that he was now responsible for making that hope a reality was both thrilling and terrifying. Reba appeared beside him, having finished her own interviews and conversations with board members. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Grateful," Marcus replied, "and scared and determined, all at the same time." "That sounds about right," Reba said with a smile. "The day you stop being scared is the day you stop pushing yourself to grow. But Marcus, I want you to know something. You're not carrying this responsibility alone. We've built a team of good people around you, and we're all committed to making this work." As they prepared to leave, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his old army buddy, Tony Martinez, who had seen coverage of the press conference on CNN. Tony lived in California now, working as an electrician and raising 3 kids with his wife, but he had struggled with his own demons after returning from Afghanistan. "Saw you on TV today, brother. Proud of you for turning your life around and helping other vets. You always were the best of us, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Marcus showed the message to Reba, who smiled as she read it. "That's what this is all about," she said. "Not just helping individual veterans, but showing everyone, including other veterans, that recovery and redemption are possible." As Marcus drove back to his apartment that evening, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. 4 weeks ago, he had been a forgotten man sleeping under bridges, convinced that his life had no meaning or purpose. Tonight, he was the director of a foundation that had the potential to help thousands of veterans across the country. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had required hard work, professional help, and the support of people who refused to give up on him. But it had also required something else: the willingness to believe that change was possible, even when everything in his experience suggested otherwise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be veterans to help, programs to develop, and the ongoing work of his own recovery to maintain. But for the first time in years, Marcus Thompson was looking forward to tomorrow, confident that his future could be different from his past. The homeless man who had saved Reba McEntire had found something even more valuable than fame or gratitude. He had found his purpose. 6 months after the press conference that launched the McEntire-Thompson Foundation, Marcus stood before the Nashville City Council, presenting the foundation's first quarterly report. The numbers told a story of remarkable success. 127 homeless veterans had been placed in permanent housing, 89 had completed job training programs, 156 were receiving mental health services, and 78 had successfully completed addiction treatment programs. But for Marcus, the real measure of success wasn't in statistics. It was in the faces of the men and women whose lives had been transformed. "Council members," Marcus said, his voice carrying the confidence that came from 6 months of sobriety and meaningful work, "I'd like to tell you about 3 individuals who represent what's possible when we refuse to give up on our veterans." He clicked to the first slide in his presentation, which showed a photograph of James Rodriguez receiving a certificate of completion from a welding program. James is a Vietnam veteran who was homeless for 5 years before our foundation helped him find housing and job training. He's now employed full-time at a manufacturing company and has moved into his own apartment. More importantly, he's become one of our peer counselors, using his experience to help other veterans navigate the challenges of recovery. The second slide featured Patricia Williams, the Marine veteran who had questioned Marcus's sincerity after the press conference. Patricia completed our substance abuse treatment program and our computer skills training course. She's now working as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit and has been reunited with her teenage daughter, who had been living with relatives while Patricia was homeless. The third slide showed a young man in his 30s wearing an army dress uniform. This is David Chen, an Iraq war veteran who came to us 3 months ago suffering from severe PTSD and living in his car. Through our comprehensive treatment program, David has not only found stable housing and employment, but he's also enrolled in college classes using his GI Bill benefits. He plans to become a social worker so he can help other veterans. Marcus looked out at the council members, noting the mix of interest and skepticism on their faces. He understood their reservations. Nashville had seen dozens of well-intentioned programs for homeless veterans over the years, most of which had failed to produce lasting results. What makes our foundation different isn't just our funding or our facilities, Marcus continued. It's our understanding that homelessness among veterans isn't usually caused by a single problem, so it can't be solved with a single solution. When someone has been living on the streets for months or years, they're not just dealing with a housing shortage, they're dealing with trauma, addiction, mental health issues, unemployment, and a loss of hope that goes to the core of who they are. Councilwoman Rebecca Thompson raised her hand. Mr. Thompson, your success rate is impressive, but I'm curious about your long-term outcomes. How do you ensure that veterans don't end up back on the streets after completing your programs? It was exactly the question Marcus had been hoping for. Councilwoman Thompson, that's the most important part of what we do. We don't just help veterans get off the streets, we help them build the skills and support systems they need to stay housed permanently. Every veteran in our program is assigned a case manager who works with them for a full year after they're placed in permanent housing. We provide ongoing mental health services, job placement assistance, and emergency support if they face unexpected challenges. Marcus clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph tracking the Foundation's participants over time. Our 12-month housing retention rate is 94%, compared to the national average of about 70% for similar programs. We achieve this by treating veterans as individuals with unique needs rather than as generic recipients of services. After the presentation, Marcus was approached by several council members who wanted to discuss potential partnerships between the Foundation and the city's existing veteran services. But the conversation that meant the most to him came from Councilman Robert Hayes, a Korean War veteran who'd been skeptical of the Foundation when it was first announced. "Son," Councilman Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I first heard about this foundation, I thought it was just another celebrity charity that would make a big splash and then disappear when the cameras left. I was wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it. What you and Ms. McEntire have built here is something special." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied. "But this isn't just about Ms. McEntire and me. We've got an incredible team of professionals who do the real work of helping veterans every day." "That may be true, but leadership matters," Councilman Hayes said. "And you've shown that you're the kind of leader who understands that real change happens one person at a time, not through government programs or bureaucratic solutions." As Marcus drove back to the Foundation headquarters, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that rainy night when he had pulled Reba McEntire from her burning car. The viral video had made him famous overnight, but it was the work he had done in the months since that had given his life meaning again. The Foundation now employed 12 full-time staff members and dozens of volunteers, operating out of 3 buildings in different parts of Nashville. They had helped establish similar programs in Memphis and Knoxville, and were receiving inquiries from veterans organizations in cities across the country who wanted to replicate their model. But perhaps more importantly, Marcus had discovered that helping other veterans had been crucial to his own recovery. Dr. Coleman had explained that this was a common phenomenon among people in recovery, that finding purpose in helping others often provided the motivation needed to maintain sobriety and continue working on personal healing. "You can't give away what you don't have," Dr. Coleman had told him during one of their sessions. "But you also can't keep what you don't give away. The more you help other veterans, the stronger your own recovery becomes." When Marcus arrived at the Foundation, he found Reba in the main conference room, working with the clinical staff to review applications for a new grant that would allow them to expand their mental health services. Despite her busy touring and recording schedule, Reba remained actively involved in the Foundation's operations, often spending entire days at the headquarters working on program development or meeting with veterans. "How did the City Council presentation go?" she asked as Marcus joined the meeting. "Better than I expected," Marcus replied. "They're interested in partnering with us on a new housing initiative for veterans with disabilities, And Councilman Hayes, who was our biggest skeptic 6 months ago, is now talking about nominating us for a Community Service Award. That's wonderful, said Dr. Angela Foster, the Foundation's clinical director. But more importantly, how are you feeling about the public speaking? I know that was something you were anxious about when we started. Marcus considered the question. 6 months ago, the thought of speaking in front of any group, much less the city council, would have triggered a panic attack. But gradually, as he had shared his story with veterans, reporters, community groups, and government officials, he had grown more comfortable with public speaking. He had learned that his nervousness disappeared when he focused on the message rather than the messenger. It's getting easier, Marcus said, especially when I remember that I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the veterans we serve and what's possible for them. The meeting continued for another hour, focusing on the logistics of expanding their services to include family counseling for veterans' spouses and children. Marcus had learned that homelessness among veterans often devastated entire families, not just the individuals who ended up on the streets. Children lost contact with their parents, marriages ended in divorce, and extended family relationships were damaged by years of crisis and disappointment. As the staff members dispersed to their various responsibilities, Reba asked Marcus to stay behind for a private conversation. They had developed a close working relationship over the past 6 months, and Marcus had come to think of her not just as his employer, but as a friend and mentor. Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something that might be a bit overwhelming, Reba began. I've been contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wants to make a film about the Foundation. It would follow several veterans through our program and show how comprehensive support can help people rebuild their lives. Marcus felt his old anxiety beginning to rise. Reba, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that kind of exposure. The Foundation is doing well, and I don't want to risk damaging what we've built by turning it into entertainment. I understand your concerns, Reba replied, and I share them, but this filmmaker isn't interested in sensationalizing anyone's story. She's made documentaries about social issues before, and her work has actually helped other non-profit organizations get funding and support. The exposure could help us expand our programs to other cities.